Hi folks, you're listening to the Paranormal Peep Show with myself, Andy Chaplin, and Neil Geddes Ward. Neil, how you doing?
I'm fine. I've been busy recording and editing and painting, all the kind of things that always keeps me busy. What about you, Andy?
Yeah, just kind of ticking along with work, basically. Organising events, usual kind of thing. Trying to get those going. If anyone's listening, please go on Facebook onto Tuned In Events, tuned with a D in events, and have a look and see what we're doing in the southeast of England. Got a few psychic fairs in pubs and a few demos going on, so that's always keeping me busy. And what about you?
Well, just painting, really, just whizzing through loads of paintings, trying to get all this artwork done for various peoples. Now, I was interested, a few months ago, there was this Notre Dame business going on with, unfortunately, Notre Dame Cathedral burning, and that's raised a lot of controversial issues about, people raising money to repair it, and yet there's all these homeless people, and that's been a bit of a thing. And now there was kind of after that, there was this thing about lots of French places of worship are being attacked or something. So was that part and parcel of the same thing, do you think?
Absolutely. I think there's definitely something going on. Who's behind it, I'm not quite sure. I don't know if this is Islamic extremists or whether it is some kind of left-wing, liberal, atheist type group. Could be a mixture of both. But yeah, it's no coincidence that a lot of churches are being attacked, burnt, and things destroyed. There's even a newspaper article I came across a while ago of Islamic extremists who went into a church and allegedly got a priest to kneel down and slit his throat in front of the congregation. And then you've got these attacks a couple of months ago in where was it? India, where again hundreds of people, or
Sri Lanka, wasn't it?
Sri Lanka, yeah, dozens actually, I think, were killed. But there were hundreds killed in Nigeria. This is often not reported. It is out there if you find it. But Islamic extremists again massacring en masse Christians out in Africa. It's the opposite of what spirituality is supposed to be. It's absolutely bizarre. People, are supposed to be, their religions, their belief systems are supposed to be peaceful. They're supposed to be about promoting spirituality, and all I'm seeing is mass slaughter. And I think it's the case for most religions, actually, or kind of man-made belief systems, that they eventually end up. If you take Christianity for a start, when at what point did Jesus, the teachings of Jesus about love thy neighbor, turn into the Spanish Inquisition and the witch hunts? So it's just really, it's horrendous, really, if you think about it. This world is not going in a spiritual direction, and I think this is actually why a lot of our guests talk about ET interactions and higher being interactions, where they're saying that humanity needs to change. We need to change our path and go into a more positive direction. Maybe our next guest might be able to help us out with this.
Yeah. Maybe our next guest can shed some light on what is really happening out there or in there, depending on your viewpoint.
And how to fix it is the main thing.
Yeah, how to fix it. Our next guest is Marilynn Hughes, who joins us from Arizona in the United States, and she is of the Out of Body Travel Organization, which sounds like a holiday site for booking a holiday, but it probably isn't.
Off you go.
But welcome, Marilynn, to the Paranormal Peep Show.
Hi, Marilynn. How are you doing?
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Thanks for joining us. So, bit of a crazy world out there, but people will perhaps describe an interest in out-of-body experiences and things pretty crazy. But obviously, this is a Paranormal Peep Show, so we're open to all kind of offers, really. So. First of all, tell us a bit about yourself, and then obviously, how did you get involved in this out-of-body experiences?
Well, ironically, I started out years ago, a lot of years ago, probably about 35 years ago, in radio broadcasting as a news reporter and anchor. And I started having spontaneous experiences when I was about, I believe I was 22. And then I eventually started journaling them because I realized that there was a pattern emerging, and that has resulted in the Out of Body Travel Foundation, which has, I've written over 90 books now on the subject, a lot of magazines as well, put out CDs as well for meditation for out-of-body travel, as well as music I received in out-of-body travel that I wrote down and performed and did all that stuff. And there's also artwork, things I've tried to depict. I'm not the greatest artist. My best gift would be writing. Maybe you would be better at that, Neil. But yeah, so we offer all of our books and resources available for free download, because we founded the foundation in 2003 with the intention to reduce spiritual hunger worldwide, and we were basing that off of something that Mother Teresa had said. Mother Teresa had said that the spiritual poverty that she saw in the West was worse than the physical poverty that she saw in India and other locations. And so we wanted to reduce the spiritual poverty worldwide and make our stuff available to anybody, no matter where they were. So everything is. It's interesting because what you're talking about has a great deal of relevance to out-of-body travel and out-of-body experiences, because these are the kinds of things that those of us who are experiencing these things are absolutely being given some insight into, ironically, from the ETs, as Andrew just mentioned, but also, from higher sources as well in the angelic hierarchies and stuff like this. The things that we're seeing are a real serious aberration here, and it's a very serious problem, because what we've done, we had a huge thrust that we could have moved forward as an entire, planet, species, etc. And we've fumbled in the last 10 to 15 years and really started going backwards. So, you look at these attacks, you look at these things, like with Notre Dame, what you're seeing is a real force of energy that's coming in from the dark thrusts that has a desire to literally extinguish God. And as you said, Neil, it is completely the opposite of what the spiritual path represents, and any religious path. One of the things I write a lot about, I have a whole section on my site of books that I've written about out-of-body experiences in various world religions. And this applies to Islam as well as all the others: Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism. All of these major religions came from a great revelation that most of the time came through out-of-body experiences with other types of paranormal phenomena. That's what we would call it today. They might have given it a slightly different term back then, but it's the same experience. But what's happened is, any time that you bring a great revelation, an out-of-body experience, or anything of that nature into structure, which is what we have here on the ground, on the earth, you are going to have things that don't translate properly. And the reason for that is because the spiritual is not a structured thing. It is an expansive energy that can't be contained really perfectly well within structure. So aberrations are expected to occur. However, the level of the aberrations that have happened are really over the top, and really, an indication of these battles between principalities and powers that are going on literally for the soul of humankind, because it is a complete and total aberration of any of the prophets, saints, mystics, sages of world religions throughout time, no matter what faith they come from, that you would kill other people or that you would destroy holy sites for the sake of, quote unquote, serving God. And the idea that there are people that can actually believe this to be true is really troubling, because it shows it's a messing up of the normal conscience that should be forming in us as human beings that would tell them that. And that's part of what this thrust is about. We're going backwards.
Do you think with the dark side that they're winning, or are they in their death throes because they know they're losing?
Unfortunately, I think that we're really at high battle right now. It's not a clear-cut victory on one side or the other. I do think we have a lot of people who are rising up, who are coming from the light, who are trying to bring this about. But I think we have, for some reason, a huge amount of people who have really gone over to the dark side. And this is taking it further than what would be typical, like maybe even 10, 15, 20 years ago, where normal people that you would consider normal if you just knew them would consider acts like this to be acceptable. Whereas, people going to the dark side previously, it would have been things where they would be doing much less serious actions. What you have here, we have, because, in most of our Western societies, like the United States, England, Europe, we have a secularization that has occurred. Ironically, in the New Testament Gospels, Jesus spoke about, I would rather you be hot or cold. If you're lukewarm, I'd spit you out of my mouth, or I'd rather spit you out of my... The reason he said this, and the reason why it's relevant right now, is because the secularism that is rising in these countries has given rise to a lukewarmness where we have a huge population that has literally completely made irrelevant the spiritual nature. And by so doing, they do not fight for either the good or the evil. They sit in the middle and they let the battles be fought by those who have made a choice. And so, when you're looking at 50, 60, 70, maybe even more percentage of your population having decided that spirituality is stupid or superstitious or whatever, you have a huge amount of people who are not even in the fight. And so what happens is those of us like yourselves and myself and many others who have particular gifts, who are naturally drawn into this battle by the nature of the fact that when you are created as we are, where you have these natural gifts, where you can't deny the existence of these things because it is a sense that you have as a natural thing. It's not something you can just discard. Those who don't see it can do that. And their indifference makes for a really, really tentative situation worldwide. And then you also have this entire wing of extremism that we're seeing as well in certain religious sects, where they have truly believed and taken on this idea that killing and destroying for God makes sense to them. And that, to people who have the spiritual thrust, who are actually working in the spiritual realms, that's ludicrous. That's insane. So we know that that's insane for those of us who, that's a dark force that is teaching them these things. Somehow they're believing it. Their normal function of conscience is not in play. And that is making it worse and more dangerous. And it's much bigger than the danger that we all face, and that any of us could be caught in the middle of one of these acts of violence and be killed or maimed. It's much bigger because we're talking about, literally extinguishing the spirit. Which is not something we want to happen in this world. That would be taking us backwards and completely the opposite. And this is why the extraterrestrials have been and continue to communicate with us and people like us who have these gifts. Because they are trying very, very hard. And in fact, a lot of them have actually withdrawn because it's not looking really good right now. And it might not go the way that we would all hope it would go. but they're trying to bring in these energetic thrusts that would help humanity and human beings to start making some choices that would move them forward into the spiritual evolution, because the human shell without the spiritual energy influxing within it becomes a dead-end casing. And that's what you're seeing with these acts of darkness. That's what you're seeing with the lukewarm souls, which are basically, I don't care one way or the other whether the spiritual matters.
You probably agree with this, Marilynn. It's almost like nihilism has become like the trendy thing. It's like, oh, I don't give a shit about anything. I don't care about anything. There's nothing out there. It's almost kind of like this trendy way of not caring about yourself, not caring about anything around you. It's just kind of like me kind of generation. Would you say that?
Oh, I definitely agree with that. Yes, I do think that that's the case. But I think both of you would also relate to what I'm saying here, which is one of the reasons this is, even just from a purely selfish standpoint, if people want to look at this just purely selfishly, doing this is really not a good thing for anybody in particular or their soul, because when people cross over, then all of a sudden they're faced with it, and people who are mediums or people who have out-of-body experiences like I do, we are called in to help them. And so, they can ignore it while they're living, but they're wasting time. There's a reason why we're encased in flesh. There's a purpose for us here. And if you ignore that spiritual influx, if you literally cut it off, this is why the dark side is working to make that happen. Because if you just cut off the spiritual influx, nobody accomplishes any evolution of the soul when they're here, or very few people do. And then you have exactly what the backwards movement would prefer. We don't want that. That's not a good thing for the evolution of humankind, or for our race, our species, or our place in the universal sphere here. And, working with other galactic worlds, which are moving towards a higher consciousness. So it's not a good thing for the light. It's a very good thing for the darkness. But yes, this idea of nihilism is really, it literally cuts people off at the knees, because they cannot move forward spiritually from a place like that.
I was going to say, winding the tape back, Marilynn, going back to the actual out-of-body experiences.
This is exactly where I was going to go. What caused it all?
Yeah. What was it? Something that you voluntarily wanted to explore, or did it kind of like happen to you and it was like, well, I need to find out what's going on, kind of thing?
That's interesting. Yes, it did kind of happen to me spontaneously. Ironically, it started, the very first inkling I had of it was when I was 9 years old. I had a really mind-bending experience, beautiful vision where the clouds parted. I was climbing up a marble staircase to heaven. There were angels on each side, and I was told that there was a purpose that I had to fulfill, and that it would come back to me a little bit later in my life, which it did later then when I was about 22. And then what happened, it started again spontaneously when I was at the age of 22. And at first I was just kind of like observing, but then I started realizing there was a pattern and I needed to journal it. I did start researching. And then ironically, in my out-of-body experiences, I would get a lot of instruction. This has been going on for, gosh, what would it be now? It would be about 32 years. I would receive a lot of instruction as to the types of things I needed to study. And I was instructed very early on to begin researching the ancient sacred texts from all the world religions and all the traditions that maybe were not religions. And literally it went from having no books in my house to having now probably about 5,000.
5,000.
Probably. But, what's interesting about this and why this is important, the ancient sacred text, these are the writings of the prophets, saints, mystics, and sages and ascetics from throughout history, throughout time. And these are the people who have ascended from this realm to the next sphere. We forget about what that means and how important that is. What does that mean to us? Well, when they left their final words in writing, they were leaving us keys. And there's not just one key. There's many, many, many keys, because God's revelation cannot be contained in one human being. So God has...
book.
Yes, or one book, yes. And so God has spoken through all of these people that he has called throughout, literally the last several millennia, some of them beyond that, even further back, and has kept, like, each one of us seems to carry certain aspects of that key. Now, like, for instance, in my work, what I have been really directed towards is the purification of the soul, which is, the realms that we live in are third and fourth dimensional. Fourth dimensional is the astral plane. Third dimensional is the physical plane. And we are here for the battles between good and evil, ironically, which is exactly what we're talking about. But those battles between good and evil also occur within our own souls. And so the path of purification, which ironically is very much spoken of in all monastic traditions and most mystical traditions, whether it's, the monastics in the Catholic religion or in the Buddhist tradition, in the Pali Canon, which is the writings that go back to the time of the Buddha, they actually have a text called The Path of Purification, which is brilliantly translated into English by Bhikkhu Namali, who I think has passed on. But we have this in all of these traditions. You'll see this ironically even, and this is one thing I love to remind people, that one of our greatest mystical poets was Muslim. It was Rumi. He was from Afghanistan. He lived about 810 years ago, I think now, around there. And the Sufi part of the Islamic sect also has their own purification spectrum, which comes through the Iya Ulum Uddin by Imam Ghazali, who lived in the 1900s, who was a Sufi mystical theologian. Sometimes people don't realize that this stuff is across the board. You see it in shamanic practices, the path of purification. You see it in, obviously, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Judaism has a huge volume of work on purification. And in fact, one of the most important things you'll find in Judaism is the importance of the purification of our words, which comes through the form of the teachings of Lashon Hara and Rekalus, which has to do with slander and gossip. And this applies to every single one of us, because our world has become very comfortable with slander and gossip. But in the time of the ancient rabbis, this was considered to be a crime akin to murder, because when you destroy the reputation of another, you are literally killing their ability to make a living. You are destroying relationships they might have with family and friends, and obviously work-related relationships and other things. And so there's a beautiful book called Echoes in the Heavenly Court, which was written by the Chofetz Chaim, who is a mid-20th century rabbi who really broke apart these laws about gossip and slander. But again, this all goes back to the path of purification. And then when you branch it out into these writings of the prophets, saints, mystics, and sages in the ancient sacred texts, you're going to find that every one of them brings forward something to us about things that we need to look at more closely within ourselves, and look at purifying and look at altering if we want to move forward and higher. And so it's a really
Marilyn,
important
what would you
part.
say kind of like would be practical steps in doing this purification?
Well, you can read any of my books. You can start with the Mysteries of the Redemption at my website, which will take you through the beginning stages, and then you're going to see all of my books will subsequently take you further and further and further. But a lot of this is done through the use as well, because I use quotations from the ancient sacred texts throughout my books. It's done throughout all my books. But the best place to just start is looking at the 7 virtues and the 7 vices, because what you have is the virtues and the vices will contradict and counter-indicate one another. So let's say if you're suffering from perhaps like, a real common one that people struggle with is lust. So the counter virtue would then be purity. And so, you're looking at the opposite. Let's say you struggle with greed, then the counter virtue would be moderation. And so what you're doing is you are disciplining your mind, disciplining your heart to apply the virtue to the vices that you may still carry within you that are giving you difficulty.
Neil, any questions?
Yeah, gosh, that's a lot to take in. I'm not even on the first page. I mean, when people have out-of-body experiences, there's obviously people like yourself, presumably listeners as well, that are having spontaneous out-of-body experiences. What kind of practical tips can you offer them? Because obviously some people might be really nervous of what's happening to them. I mean, how would you guide them through those early stages of spontaneity? Or indeed, there could be some people out there that want to try out-of-body experiences, and would that be something you'd recommend?
Well, I have a book called Come to Wisdom's Door, which is the first, and it's how to come to Wisdom's Door, how to have an out-of-body experience. But it's the first in a series of 9 books that go through each subsequent level of the how-tos. Most people, when they read Come to Wisdom's Door and the Mysteries of the Redemption, often will find themselves starting to have spontaneous experiences. Ironically, when I wrote the Mysteries of the Redemption, I was told that it was being programmed energetically to make possible within the minds of those who read it these experiences, and by making it possible, then it opens the energetic gateway, so to speak. So many of my readers report having those experiences very quickly. Come to Wisdom's Door is a very short book that can give you a lot of steps just to get started, and then the subsequent 8 volumes will go into different levels of energetic law, how things work in the mystical realms versus the physical realms, and then going into deeper and deeper mysteries of traveling. I do think that most people, if they really desire this, are okay to give this a shot. And a lot of people find, because this ironically is not something that is intended to just be unique to a few in our future human configuration. So what we're trying to do is bring that higher psychic development, which comes from, the opening of the third eye, but also the crown chakra, because the crown chakra has a lot to do with the traveling in and out of the body. But what we have to do is start making people giving them a framework where they can begin, because there are a lot of steps. A lot of these things are outlined in both the How-To series and the Mysteries of the Redemption series. It's going to go through a lot of these things. For instance, an example would be when you first start having the experiences, they're probably going to be very grounded. So you're probably going to have a spontaneous experience where you roll out of your body or find yourself out of your body in your room. And that's, it's got its own challenges. For instance, consciousness then you are dealing with consciousness from the spirit rather than from the body. So you have to learn how to utilize thinking to see, to hear, and to move. And the natural inclination is to try to walk, or to try to visualize from where your eyes should be, or to hear from where your ears should be. And so there's a process where you start learning how to move, see, speak, feel, and of course, a lot of speech in the mystical realms is telepathic, so that's part of that. But you start learning to do that from the entire consciousness, and that's all thought based. It comes from, so I want to see, you have to utilize thought to make that happen rather than move your eyes. If you want to move, you have to think about where you want to go rather than just start moving towards it. As you progress, and this is another example of another phase that's important, and all these things are outlined very much in Come to Wisdom's Door and the Mysteries of the Redemption, and then they go into much, much deeper. As you progress in these experiences, you're not going to be just hanging around the astral realm. So what happens is you get to a point where you're starting to move interdimensionally, and you're going to different realms, because all of this is intended for your education and your edification, so that you can realize what it is you need to be working on, and also accomplishing while you're here in this physical unit. There's a reason why we have a temporary existence here. So we want to try to discover it, so we make good use of our time here. And a lot of times what happens is people will then have a block, because they will get out of their body, but they don't know where to go. They don't, and so, one of the things I instruct is that you shout out the corridor, because there are actually probably anywhere from at least 5 to 10, and probably those are the ones I've seen. So there might be probably many others that I have not yet seen, different types of tunnels that will take you interdimensionally. So for instance, there's a tunnel that will take you backward and forward in time. That one is the one that you often see and hear about with near-death experiences, which is the black tunnel with the light at the end. And the way it functions in an out-of-body experience is that you'll shoot through that, and then you'll suddenly be dropped. Your spirit will be dropped into the body of either a previous lifetime of yours, or into a circumstance where you are going to be offering assistance, either in the past or in the future. And these kinds of things can happen. There's also the tunnels that take you into the realms of initiation. Those ones are like thin ribbed tunnels. They have these ribs that circle around the inside of the tunnel. These ones are harder to traverse, because, these are things where, all of these things are things you have to be invited and you have to become compatible to in
order to. Who do you think built them?
Well, I believe it all comes from creation. I believe God built all of this. We have a huge universe. Everything that has ever existed exists in the mystical spheres somewhere. So like, for instance, the original Garden of Eden, when you go through the initiations into the mysteries, there's an original Garden of Eden that you go to undergo initiation. But there's also the pyramids of ancient Egypt, which carry within them a lot of Egyptian mysteries that you also have to travel through. There's so much. We have such an infinite existence, and this is one of the real dangers of this nihilism that we were talking about earlier, because reality and the purpose of human existence has to do with that multidimensionality, and it is through that we have the ability to complete what we're here to do. And so by cutting it off, we're really messing with the mechanism that God has set in place to bring about the purpose of our existence here. Another thing that's real important is vibration, and I'm going to bring that up because when we're talking about you have to be invited, it has to be compatible. This is how it works as to how you become compatible and how you then subsequently are then invited. When you first start having the out-of-body experiences, you've probably heard people talk about this vibrational state. What's happening is your spirit and your body are separating from one another. Your physical body has a lower vibration than your spirit just by nature. So you experience this vibrational state, but what it is actually happening is that you are experiencing your consciousness transferring from your physical vibration to the spiritual one, which is higher. But the normal vibration of any one of our spirits is still a far cry from where it needs to be. So one of the things that you will undergo are what I call vibrational raisings throughout the course of your travels, because you need to have your vibration raised and uplifted in order to then travel to higher and higher spheres and to go into higher phases of learning. And we can't forget that these higher phases of learning are not necessarily all higher spheres, because there was a point in my journey where it was like, okay, it's time now for you to learn about the dark side, which was at the time not something I was thrilled about, but I've obviously learned over the years that that was very, very important. And part of that is we go back to one of the things that was always said to me from the very beginning, which was creation continues to create, which is what you're talking about, was where did it come from? Creation continues to create. So whatever I've seen, I'm sure a lot of things have been created since, you know what I mean? And continue to be created. But there's also this law of return and the giving back law, which is basically that we are required to give back to creation that which creation has given to us. And so as we receive, we must also give. It's part of the normal process of evolution and how it occurs. So why is that relevant when you're talking about learning about the dark side? Because when you start becoming capable of giving back what you have been given, then you start becoming required to understand the nature of various types of dark states, evil states, ignorant states as well. And you start traveling through purgatorial realms and hell realms where you offer assistance to souls who are ready to take another leap forward. And what we have to remember is that wherever we may be, we were also once there. So somebody helped us to get here. We have angelic assistance. We have extraterrestrial assistance. We have all types of really neat assistance coming to us here. And we have to then remember that we are also going to be required to go into some of the more uncomfortable places to help others who haven't received that yet.
In what form did the dark side did you experience? How did you kind of like wade through that yourself?
Well, it's a very that's it, a lot of ways is the way I would start it. You know, the first experience I had regarding the having to learn about it, the Blessed Virgin Mary came to me, and she said, it's time for you to learn about the dark side. And I remember cringing because I was, I had been very blessed up to that point where I was seeing all the good stuff and it was wonderful and I loved it, and so I was nervous and scared. And frankly, part of me at that time was even a little bit in denial, I think, about what the dark side really was. Now, what you experience, there's a lot of things that you experience. I've gone to a lot of different realms, hell realms, purgatorial realms, for every type of delusion or confusion that you see in the human psyche, you can anticipate that there is a realm that correlates with it, which is instructive. So one of the real popular realms, and ironically going back again to nihilism, one of the real popular purgatorial realms, because I help a lot of souls who are crossing over into the afterlife, is a realm that I call chaos. And there's obviously a lot of different configurations of the chaos realm. So there's not just one, there's many. But the similar concept in the chaos realm is taking what we are seeing with so many people with distraction to the extremes. So in these chaos realms, there's always a circling motion where the soul is just going around in circles. There's a lot of noise. Sometimes there's a carnival-esque type atmosphere. I've gone to chaos realms that were more related to souls who had crossed over in the 1800s, which would be the 19th century. And in those realms, there would be a lot of chaotic elements that were more relevant to the time frame in which they had lived. And these souls were just running around in this circle, all of these noise and distraction and all of these just novelties that serve no purpose. But you could not get them to change that focus. But whenever I'm taken into a chaos realm, usually there's at least one soul that I'm there to serve, and there's at least one soul who is realizing they don't want to continue in that cycle. They want to break free. And then you are giving them information as to how do they exit that particular realm and go to the next step. So chaos is real common with a lot of people who cross over. Another thing that we're seeing a lot of in this day and age, I don't know if this is as much an issue in the UK as it is in the United States, so you guys can inform me, but in the United States, suicide is really, really on the rise. And so
definitely here. There are definitely cases. There was a place, was it in Wales, Neil? Do you remember when a lot of students decided to take their own lives?
That's Bridgend, and a lot of people suggested it's associated with the telephone masts and things.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so it's happening there too. And, but what you see, there's a lot of places that are very commonly being filled with people who are committing suicide, because there's a very specific purification process for people who have committed suicide. Ironically, I think, a lot of people think that if you commit suicide, it's ironically just automatically a hell type place that they're going to go to. But usually that's not the case, because people who usually commit suicide are usually really, really in a bad place. And God is very merciful and loving. And so God wants to apply correction and help them to understand what's happened and how to rebuild their soul rather than to tear it down more. So, and ironically too, what I've also seen is, in my experience, and I can only speak from my own, because I know there are other mystics who have seen things that indicate hell as being an eternal place. But in my experiences, even hell is not an eternal place. But what you see is, even in those lowest of realms, there's a progression that occurs. From going from wherever they might be. If they're in the lowest space, they're going to take a step up each time, and help is sent. Ironically, there's a quotation from the book of Psalms where David said, in the highest heavens you are there, even in the lowest hells you are there. And that's definitely something I've seen to be true. So the moment a soul calls out for help from God, it's an instant reaction. Help is sent. But what can easily be seen when you look at what people are talking about, and of course, again, speaking only for what I've seen, because I can't speak to what other people have seen, as there could be realms of hell that are eternal that I have not yet seen. But what I could also say is that the realms of hell that I have seen, for those who go there, it often seems very eternal, because of the fact that we as human beings and then as souls, we can become very attached to our vices or to our false views, as the Buddhists would put it, to the point where there can be many situations where if a soul is simply just that hardened in where they're at and they're not allowing any chance for change to occur, then it's going to seem like it's an eternal place, because they're not going to be making any movement forward. And so there are, that's just kind of going into those questions about it. But in terms of the evil, for instance, I'll give you some idea about vibration and how it all relates. When you are dealing with the out-of-body experiences, as you go through purification, you are removing fetters from your soul. Buddhists would call it fetters. Catholics might call it sinful nature. It's the same thing. It's tendencies to do things that are against life itself, which are things that hold us back or turn us backwards rather than move us towards God. So it's very simple to see it in that way. And in fact, sometimes I like the way the Buddhists refer to it, because sometimes people who come from the Christian background, and I'm Catholic myself, so I'll just make that clear, sometimes they can get so caught up in the guilt, and then it's harder for them to actually just take the steps, because these things are a disciplinary process. And so the Buddhists have a very healthy way of approaching their fetters, which is to just start removing your fetters one thing at a time. So you have to identify them first. But how, again, this relates to vibration. So we have a particular vibration that we are at when we're on Earth. As you want to go higher into the higher vibrational spheres, you need to have a higher, finer vibration. And that's where the vibrational raisings come in, and that's why they are necessary. So if you're going higher, and if you try to go into a realm that is not compatible to you yet, that it's higher than your vibration, you will literally feel like you are being crushed. So this also applies when you're going towards the dark side. So when you want to go to higher, finer frequencies, you have to get rid of weight. And this is the simplest way to really make it understandable in terms of vibration. Higher, finer frequencies are getting rid of weight. Weight are the fetters and the things that hold us to the ground, hold us to physical manifestation and the earth in a negative way. So when you're going to the lower spheres, what happens, and this is what happens at the moment of death. It's Emanuel Swedenborg, who was a 16th century mystic, talked about this. You go where you're compatible. And what I've seen is you go where your weight takes you. So if you are barraged with a lot of weight from a lot of fetters, a lot of karma, a lot of bad actions, then your soul is heavy and you literally will just sink. And that's how you end up going lower. If throughout your life you are working to remove fetters, your soul becomes lighter, you're going to naturally start rising as you cross over. And so when you understand this whole vibration thing is so important, a lot of people don't understand that vibration really is knowledge. And so as we obtain to higher and higher knowledge, our vibration goes higher. And part of this process is that there are certain things that are among the mysteries of God that we can only understand through vibration. So we can get a certain sense of it in a physical degree, but when we really understand it will be when we have had our vibration raised to the point that all of a sudden it becomes clear to us. It becomes vibrational knowledge. And so this vibration is very applicable to our existence here, to the existence in the darker spheres and to the existence in the higher spheres. And, with out-of-body experiences, the other thing that happens that people experience when they have a spontaneous experience is the loud jet engine type noises, but it's actually louder than jet engines, but that's the closest thing we can come to. And again, is vibration. They're hearing the difference of the vibration in that sphere. And when someone is just having a spontaneous out-of-body experience, like in the physical realm, they're hearing the vibration in the fourth realm, which is the astral plane. Now, the astral plane overlaps the third realm and is another realm that is operates under the conditions of the battles between good and evil within ourselves and all around us. So that's ironically another point, but I'll just make it real quick, which is when people talk about astral travel, it probably doesn't matter that much, but it's a misunderstanding, because your goal is not to continue to travel in the astral realm, because you can't learn much there. It's an overlay of human existence. It's a place where a lot of souls end up. Oftentimes, lost souls and wandering souls end up in this astral plane. So the reason I speak of it as out-of-body travel and experiences is because that encompasses the multidimensional universe, which includes the higher and the lower and the mid-level spheres, whereas astral plane, if you're going to be just very dictionary oriented,
so is this what essentially ghost hunters and demonic hunters are coming across when they go to so-called haunted houses, do you think?
A lot of the haunted houses are dealing with fourth realm type beings. A lot of them are lost souls and wandering spirits. But in some of these haunted places, you are also dealing with demonic spirits. And so that takes it to a whole new level. Lost souls and wandering spirits are things that many of us can help with. Even, if you come across, even just praying for those souls is going to be of assistance to them, praying for their assistance to cross over. But there's a whole process that I outline in the Mysteries of the Redemption about the process of how do you help a lost soul? How do you help them to cross over? And again, we're going to go to vibration here with the lost souls and the wandering spirits, that when someone who crosses over, who either doesn't believe in anything, or they died so suddenly that they're just very confused, or they're really attached to their physical life and having trouble with accepting what's happened, that's where they will often go, into the fourth realm. Now, if they are unable to raise their vibration enough where they can actually see their guardian angels, see the tunnel and see the light, then they would be able to do that. But the reason souls become lost a lot of the time is because they are unable to do that process of their own. And the reason why being that there wasn't any cultivation during their life that would prepare them for that. So, most people, when they cross over, they will be taken through these processes very simply and very easily, but then you have some who are more either resistant to it, or sometimes it's traumatic related, because these sudden deaths, the people in Sri Lanka, I'm sure there's a lot of cleaning up that will need to be done over the, I'm sure a lot has been done in the last couple of months, but there will also be more that needs to be done to help souls fully cross over. One of the things also that I was shown, and I got to work with them, was what I called the disaster crew. And these are souls who specifically go into situations where there is massive sudden death. And so there's a lot of mechanisms that are in place wherein God reaches out to people in all sorts of situations. But when
I was going to ask whether it's a situation for a soul to move on and escape, whether it has to come from within them, or whether they are reached out to, or a bit of both.
It's both, and And, really, when we cross over, it really is more of being reached out to. But with lost souls and, wandering spirits can also be purgatorial spirits. So we'll just set that aside for a minute so as not to confuse. But with lost souls, you're dealing with specifically like ghosts, people who are stuck here, but don't really need to be, and they are often really attached to, especially when you go to these places where there are long-term hauntings for periods of time. Like in the United States, there's a lot of places that people will go to, like old prisons or old orphanages where horrible things happened or whatever. And what happens is souls will congregate. So when people in those circumstances will, cross over, oftentimes there's a grouping of souls that then they might join. And so that's how you can end up with these long-term places where hauntings go on for quite a long time, as well as the fact of, even just in individual homes, people are often very attached to their home after death, especially if they haven't, especially if they didn't have any views on God or the afterlife, and they didn't put any work in towards that. All of their focus can then be turned to what they did in the physical world, and they're not ready to go forward. And so as a soul who experiences out-of-body travel like I do, I would be called in to become like the physical beacon that they can see, because they can see me. They're not able to see their guardian angels yet. And I would work on raising their vibration, communicating with them, helping them to understand and accept their scenario, and then helping them to lift up just enough so they're able to see their guardian angels and to see the light, and then they would be guided accordingly.
Do you think that, for instance, when people do remote viewing, they are almost doing an out-of-body experience, or do you think those two are completely separate things?
Well, ironically, I do remote viewing as well, and it's a very, very different experience. Very, very, very different.
Can you explain the differences? Because I'm quite interested in this.
Sure. An out-of-body experience is a fully conscious experience where your spirit is completely separated from your physical body. Your physical body is usually unconscious, and you are traveling to multidimensional realms. The remote viewing experience is much more of a psychic experience in nature, where you're utilizing a structure to a structure that has proved useful through trial and error to harness the psychic gift, but also harness the unconscious intuition of a human being as it connects to all consciousness. In remote viewing, there's this is also applicable to out-of-body travel because it's true in both senses. But in remote viewing, there's a lot of focus on the fact that it works because people can connect to all life, all existence. It goes into the quantum physics and how one particle in one part of the universe can impact another particle on the other side of the universe. And that's how remote viewing is structured and then funneled into focusing on a target. But it's very, very different from out-of-body experiences, because remote viewing is more of a psychic type gift that is being structured into something very functional and helpful and useful. Out-of-body experiences, when followed through the Spirit of God, it is a God-directed evolution of the soul. It's completely different, and the experiences you have are completely different.
Right. I'm going to have to put the brakes on for that one for a second, because we're coming up to our break now. But gosh, this is really getting some heavy stuff here. It's interesting because
I love it.
I'll ask some more questions after the break about remote viewing. I'm kind of interested in that as well as the out-of-body stuff. But for the minute then, we'll just say thank you very much to Marilynn Hughes of the Out-of-Body Travel organisation, which is found on the internet. So thank you, Marilynn, for the moment, and we shall be back after these messages.
Good evening, Agent 47. It has come to our attention through the highest intelligence sources that Irene Allen Block has published her novel, The Psychic Spy. Our sources tell us that The Psychic Spy is a riveting thriller about Eileen Evans, a beautiful young psychic who was recruited by British intelligence during the Cold War to participate in their top-secret remote viewing spy program. Eileen soon finds herself plunged deeper into the darkest heart of the intelligence community as she is ultimately trained as a spy and a psychic assassin. Nick Redfern says The Psychic Spy is filled with adventure, intrigue, and shadowy characters. And as Irene Allen Block shows, the mind is a mysterious and dangerous tool. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to immediately purchase a copy of The Psychic Spy by Irene Allen Block, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Glanatai.com. This tape will self-destruct in 1 second.
This is Barry Fitzgerald from Ghost Hunters International. In my book, In the Mist of Gods, I explore the world of the fairies or fae. This is not the whimsical winged creatures romanticized in modern literature and popular culture, but old-world, intelligent, and sometimes dangerous beings hidden in the tunnels, mounds, and raths in countries all over the world. Known by many names, the Fae coexist with mankind and at times come in direct contact with unsuspecting people whose lives are changed forever. In the Mist of Gods is a powerful book that chronicles my years of research into the enigma and legend of the fairy and examines their metamorphosis into the modern-day extraterrestrial phenomena. In the Mist of Gods is available in both softcover and Kindle format on Amazon and on Glanatai.com.
Well, here's the President returning from his trip through the black hole. How did you pass the time, sir?
Listening to the Paranormal UK radio.
Well, it's marvellous seeing a small Trump emerging from the mighty black hole.
Hello, welcome back to the Paranormal Peep Show. This is Neil Geddes Ward with Andy Chaplin, and we're talking to Marilynn Hughes of the Out of Body Travel Organisation. So if you listened to part one, which I surely hope you were, we were talking about remote viewing in comparison to the differences of out of body experiences. And certainly when I've read about remote viewing, Marilynn, I've come across various people that were used by, I think it was the CIA possibly in the United States, maybe in the 70s. Ingo Swann is a name that always sort of rises to the surface in my research on that. Have you heard of Ingo Swann?
Oh, yeah, and I worked on a research experiment with him. And with Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who was, the sixth man on the moon on 2 research projects. Yeah. So ironically, yes, Ingo Swann actually came to me in an out-of-body experience about 4 nights ago. So,
oh my gosh.
Him and also Pat Price. I don't know if you heard of Pat Price, but Pat Price also was around the same time as Ingo Swann. And they were both there to download some information into me because I'm remote viewing. So they wanted to help me with that. Part of where they're coming from is they want this research to continue because the more we need to do the legwork, so to speak, of continuing the process so that it can be perfected and made into everything that it can become.
So I think that some of the first communication devices, like the television, were actually, in fact, invented to try and communicate with spirits. Apparently,
I've heard that as well. Have you heard that?
I didn't know that. That's interesting. Yeah. Yes, I did not know.
Yeah, I know. I think it's John Logie Baird was trying to sort something out, and I think there was claims he was receiving images or communications via the spirit world into his TV. Unfortunately, it all had to stop when the BBC said, no, you've got to buy a license. So they took his TV away. But I think also Marconi, who invented the radio, or the wireless as it's called back in the early years of it, was actually, again, like Andy says, looking into the idea of communicating with the spirit world via, electromagnetic waves and things like that. So that's an interesting snippet there. But
interesting, because that is part of what a remote viewing is said to, the reason it is said to work is through the electromagnetic waves. And ironically, for those who might struggle with the idea of out-of-body travel or remote viewing, is the radio and the television are excellent examples of how electromagnetic waves do exist, and there are ways that we can harness them that we see all around us nowadays because so much technology has advanced.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's TVs are getting so complex now where you talk to them and they talk back. It's getting very
Yes. Yes.
So, I mean, I can imagine one day there will be a channel just set aside for the spirit world or something, you know, or your late mother leaves a voicemail or something on your special device. You know, that'd be cool.
That would be very cool. Yeah. But,
Yeah.
you know, I know some of the original instruments that they utilized when working with mediums were kind of like transistor radio type instruments, but they had it set to some type of frequency that was different, and they were able to record some of those spirit voices. That was like in the 50s and 60s, I think.
Well, that's come around again because, of course, we've got voice boxes and
Right.
and those random word generators that often have kind of words that are actually not random and quite poignant, which is quite interesting.
That's very true. Yes.
Yeah. So back to the remote viewing then with Ingo Swann. For those that don't know him, Ingo, as I said, worked for the CIA amongst other organizations doing remote viewing. And I believe he was originally sort of like sending his psyche, for want of a better description, out to the Soviet Union to look at nuclear submarine bases and that kind of hidden stuff they had there. And then later on, in the book that I read, he apparently was asked to remote view to the moon by a mysterious Mr. Axelrod, who engaged his services one time to see if there was bases on the moon, which was very interesting. And he thought there was, and he reported humans and things. Now, have you done anything similar, like remote viewed the moon or gone out of your body to the moon?
I have gone to the moon out of body. I haven't tried to remote view it yet. I'm focusing more on whatever targets are given to me right now. But over time, I certainly intend to do that. And I do think experiences that I've had out of body have to do with the extraterrestrials and with the moon and with other planets as well and other galaxies. So you can definitely experience that in both. I think remote viewing is just a very different method of how to do it.
So where did you go to on the moon? Any specific targets that you can mention?
When I had the out-of-body experience to the moon, it was specifically, was going through a rite of passage where I had to leave a physical sign of me having been there. And so the point was to leave some type of a handprint in the surface of the moon. And so that was very brief. But I had a lot of experiences with the Pleiadians, with the Alpha Centaurians, with the Greys. I've had experiences regarding a lot of different races. I went to the Galactic Council, which was quite the interesting adventure, which is one of the organizations that we're hoping, we will be able to actually become a part of as the planet Earth. But we have to become a galactic world first before we can officially be allowed into something like the Galactic Council. But the Galactic Council has like 2 or 3 representatives from each planetary sphere. And there were hundreds of beings there. I was also taken to another planet of the origin of which I did not know what it was, to watch the splitting of the Earths. I had a lot of visions about the thing you hear a lot of people talk about.
Well, hang on, I think you're cutting out there. Can you say that? You had a lot of experiences of things which other people talk about, the splitting of the Earth. How does that work?
Well, I've read other mystics and stuff have had experiences about the fact that the Earth will split into 2 Earths, and one will remain essentially the same, and one would go to a higher sphere. And I was taken to this planet. There were people beings from many different worlds, literally hundreds of different worlds, and we were all there to watch where the old Earth was coming towards the planet, And then it seemed like it was going to collide with the planet that we were in, but then what ended up happening was it split into two. And so those who resonate to a higher vibration would then would resonate and immediately transport to this higher realm of Earth. And that goes into a lot of what you talk about with the transmitting of the, how our thoughts can definitely impact our reality, because there's all these parallel things that are always going on of every moment in everyone's life. And we do resonate to the places where our thoughts might be leading. And this, the two Earths is definitely indicative of that. Because if you...
so is this kind of metaphorically speaking with the two Earths or two physical Earths colliding?
I think that the secondary Earth would probably not be completely physical. I think it might be more fifth dimensional. So it would be a break for certain souls that were reaching to the higher. They would automatically transcend to the higher fifth dimensional Earth, whereas those who still need this third dimensional one would remain on this planet. But we do have many parallel existences that can be coinciding at the same time, and I don't mean to make it too complicated. But yeah, there's a lot of different worlds out there. There's a lot of different races, a lot of different species. There's species that look very human, but they have different sorts of things that make them stand out. For instance, like I remember specifically this one race that looked very human, but they had tails that looked like turkey tails. Was very interesting. So there would be all these different types of morphings of different types of biological characteristics, and the other thing about this, in terms of traveling to the other spheres and planets, one of the things I was told very clearly many times is, some of these aliens that are coming in are mortal beings like we are. Mortal being meaning that they operate in a third and fourth dimensional sphere, which then subsequently means they work in a realm of good and evil and the manifestation thereof. That means they have free will. So that would indicate, like with the Greys, for instance, those are mortal beings just like we are. So they're doing a lot of things that, they might use human beings as laboratory rats, So they're going to be kind of like we are in the sense that they do things kind of out of selfish motivations. Sometimes, just like we have humans who have higher aspirations and lower aspirations, they would have both. But then you have like races like the Pleiadians, who specifically have intervened here to attempt to bring this sphere to a higher level, because they're a very highly advanced spiritual civilization. The one experience that I had that I will never forget was this beautiful experience where I was honored to meet a being who came from a world that was highly advanced, even beyond the Pleiadians. I mean, literally eons beyond the Pleiadians. And what he wanted me to do was blend into him, which meant that he hugged me, and then I was able to transport to his planet and experience what it was like there. And they exist in such a high vibration and such a beautiful space. I really just didn't want to come back, but I had to, and but it was so beyond anything you can really even comprehend here. But I think it's important for us to know that those types of worlds do exist. There was another race that I encountered who was trying very hard to work with earthly human beings. They had told me at the time that I saw them that they had active contact with 5 human beings that they were working on vibrationally and energetically. And they told me that the Tibetan people were the most receptive to their assistance. And, people have asked me, because I've brought this up, why do you think that's the case? And, I can only guess, because they didn't really just tell me. But I think part of it is that they live much more of a quieter life, a serene life. There's a peacefulness, and they're kind of remote where they live. And so it offers, and I don't know if altitude has anything to do with it.
It's because they can't get Wi-Fi.
Maybe that is it. But these guys were like probably somewhere in between where the Pleiadians would be, and this other race that I mentioned that were just so far beyond our comprehension, or even just we can't even really take it in what they are. They're beyond just being purely light. It's beyond that. So these ones were like in between. But these ones were also here working for the attempt to bring the human soul to a higher elevation. But they had told me only 5, when you think about that, there were only 5 souls that they were able to be working on at that time. And it's because we are so closed off to the reception of these higher energies that we are kind of like, making it very hard.
We're the slow kids in the class.
We are. Yes, we are.
We're on the naughty step, I think.
Yeah, we kind of have to stand in the corner, and but it's good for us to just even be aware of these things, because by becoming aware of them, we make it possible for people to open up their hearts and minds to be more receptive, so that the energetic thrusts that are coming in from the extraterrestrials themselves might be more well received. But, again, just going back to what we had talked about earlier with denialism, that is where you're starting to see how destructive that can be to the entire evolutionary progress of us as a human species, because God is life itself, the energy that comes to us. And whether you call it God or you want to call it the universe, it's the same thing. When you're cutting yourself off from that, you're literally cutting yourself off from life, which means progress forward becomes impossible. So we end up wasting a lot of time. And so being more aware of how those kinds of ideas and constructs can actually hinder our progress here, I think is very helpful. We have to remember we are a temporary life form in this realm. We are eternal life forms across the universe. Most people will live their lives as if this is a permanent situation. But the remembrance that that is not true is one of the very important factors in opening up the hearts and minds of people to again allow the life force to start moving through them and creating that circular motion from the universe to themselves, rather than blocking it off. Because when we block it off, you can't move forward. So creating an opening to receiving those energies is really, really important, because evolution eventually comes down to energy. Evolution occurs through the influx of energy that we allow to raise our vibration, which is knowledge as well. And so very important things for people to ponder and be open to if they don't want to get caught up in some of the cycles that we're seeing in our world right now that are really tripping up a lot of people in accomplishing what they actually incarnated here to do.
With your dealings with the dark side, Marilynn, would you say there's anything more to the psychology other than the fact they're just complete selfish arseholes? Do you think there's actually something deeper or more meaningful, or are they just literally like serial killers or whatever, just selfish arseholes?
Well, ironically, that's a great point. Let me take it a little further. I had a near-death experience in 2003, and I was given the option to leave at the time. I was told that I'd completed what I needed to complete, but that if I wanted to go back, God would use me for other things. And so I went back, and I had little kids at the time. They're all grown now. One of the things that Jesus told me in that experience was, that the purpose of human life is to go from selfishness to selflessness. And so I guess the way I would rephrase what you said is that most of us are selfish assholes. But when you're going in towards like evil and true darkness, which is not just born of ignorance, the majority of human beings are selfish through ignorance, and not really cultivating anything, not really doing the work that we're supposed to be doing here. But when you're dealing with true evil, it is an entirely different construct, and it is extremely dangerous, very, very mind-bending to confront, and it's not something that you want to go into without the proper protection.
Let me put it another way, Marilynn. What did you learn from it, from confronting actual evil?
There's so much that I've learned from it. I can just give you some examples. You have an evil that is related to things that are like satanic or dark magic, and that kind of has its own type of energy. You have the evils that are related to like rage. They're demons of different types of vices. Just as, in the other side of it, there are angels of virtue. So as you cultivate things like patience, kindness, or whatever, you're going to be receiving angels of those virtues that will assist you. But when you're going into those lower spheres, there's demons that cover all the vices as well. So there are really, really, the darkest stuff that I have experienced has been those who are involved in the satanic, deeply black occult things. There is like a special place reserved for them in hell. I'm sorry to say, it's very awful. It wouldn't really, be at Joe really Biden's awful.
House, would it be, by any chance?
No, he would come nowhere close. These are very unusual types who, when you're dealing with that, these are people who it's chosen. It's not like, gee, I'm just really not that bright, and I've just decided, that would be more of an ignorance scenario. When you're dealing with this level, you're dealing with chosen evil. And these people are evil because they like it, because they enjoy it. It's compatible to them. But you also have, like, for instance, I mentioned the demon of rage. It's like this tiny little snake, looks like a little garter snake. And then when the demon blasts, it turns into this monstrous serpent that's like, 100 feet tall. And I think a lot of us can relate to that in terms of having seen it in ourselves or others. And but then you also have places that are reserved for vices like vanity. A lot of people really miss the point of vanity, I think. There's a particular hell realm called Muddy Flats, which is for those who are engaged in greed and vanity. And this can be, it's a really nasty place. It's just mud. There's a cave that you go in there. There's, and once you go in, it's pretty hard to get through the breakthroughs that would require to get out. But people do eventually, but a lot of people stay because it's compatible. We forget that there are a lot of degrees of offenses against life. And, vanity is a big one. Lust is a real common one. Greed is one that's attached to a lot of people to some degree or another. And I think part of the reason when you're dealing with the dark black occult things is you're just dealing with really deep stuff. Now, one of the things about that, though, that you have to look at is that would not necessarily just be people who practice those kinds of things on a physical level here. It would be that their actual internal vibration resonates that way. So even like a Muslim could have that, which would be, the hatred of the Christ spirit, to the point where it's evil, and when you go to those particular realms, it's just teeming with these really horrible demonic reptilian creatures who will torment you. When you're dealing with the demonic and you're having spiritual battle and spiritual warfare, you're going to feel the evil, and it's like a consumption energy. Evil likes to consume. It likes to destroy. The light is all about creation. The darkness is all about destruction. And so, ironically, when we look at even just events in our world, it's really easy to understand what things are working towards creation and which are working towards destruction. And that might actually be something that people can utilize when trying to discern between decisions that they might be making in their lives, because that really is the crux of the matter. But when you're dealing with spiritual warfare, you're dealing with the demonic, you call out for the help of Jesus Christ. Even when you're dealing with the out-of-body experience and having visions of angels and good things, you have to do discernment as well. So you're going to use the same discernment that's called biblical discernment, which is if an angelic-looking being comes to you, you're going to ask, were you sent on behalf of God? Were you sent by Jesus Christ? Do you believe that Jesus Christ came down and became man? And all these things, because when you ask those questions, the demons are required to reveal themselves. If the angelic-looking creature is not what it seems to be, they will either morph into what they really are, which is often a very horrible type reptilian demonic creature, or they will look down and act ashamed, and they will turn and they will walk away and leave. This can also happen with the souls of the dead, and this is why it's important. For instance, I'll give you an example where I had a friend who had died many years ago, and he had come and said it was time for me to cross over, and wanted me to go with them. And of course, this is a really close friend, so I'm like, well, maybe I should. But then I just asked him, I said, did God send you? Are you here because this is what God has commanded, or are you here because this is what you want? And he looked down, turned away, and walked away. We have to remember that disembodied spirits are people who have crossed over, and they have the same failings as we have when we're here. And so we have to utilize a lot of discernment. There's a huge amount of information when you want to go into spiritual warfare. I have a whole book on spiritual warfare, angels and demons, and I just released a book called The Christ of the Redemption, which is specifically about the heavy-duty spiritual warfare and energetic alteration. But it's also all throughout the Mysteries of the Redemption, where it lays it out for you in a very clear and very decisive way. In the third section of that book is when I start going through the training for the darker realms and start going into the hell realms and learning about them. And then there's another section in that book where I'm learning about the alteration of reality. And what is the alteration of reality? It is when we're dealing with events as they occur on the ground in the earth, we are dealing with stuff that comes down from a realm that I like to call management, which is where the conflagration of all of our thoughts, actions, deeds, and words and stuff is all forming what's going to happen before. Energetic alteration occurs when God sends souls through the out-of-body travel state to that management realm to alter the outcome of something that someone is energizing that God feels should be avoided. We do have the free will, so that doesn't happen with everything. But there are times when God will intervene because of a higher purpose that he doesn't want the soul to. And, I think every person knows of times where, but for the grace of God, they should have, something dumb that they did might have caused their own death or really destroyed their life. And some unknown force altered that, or some last minute decision, which could be the result of an alteration as well, altered that, and it changed the course of their life and the course of their destiny. And so that's where you go into the alteration realms as well. There's a lot of different aspects to the dark realms. They're just as, ironically, they're just as infinite as the light realms. So do
you see a separation between the ET dark realm and the spirit or demonic dark realm, and the same with the higher beings of spirit and kind of the angelic realms? Are we talking different dimensions, or are we talking the same thing but different labels?
These are different dimensions. And, it's interesting because I've heard a lot of the theories that go out now about, well, maybe the reptilians were the demons that people saw in the Middle Ages, and that's just not true. I can totally see how someone might think that, but in the out-of-body travel state, there is a hierarchy that has to do with the heavenly realms and just the nature of our universe. And there is also these other beings, these other extraterrestrial beings that exist within those spheres, but they are not that. You can easily discern the difference between like a reptilian as an extraterrestrial, even though many of them have a dark thrust. A demon is very different. When you're in those mystical spaces, in the out-of-body travel realms, there's something called energetic truth, where the truth according to God is revealed to you. So whatever your own perception of an event, circumstance, being, or whatever might be, the energetic truth is then revealed to you so that you can be of assistance. And this is really important because it is the energetic truth is really the key to all of us in terms of our own discernment processes in our lives of going forward in a way that will serve evolution and serve for individual evolution, because there are so many delusions, illusions that we all have as human beings. We see things through human eyes, and there is a profound gift that you experience in the out-of-body state as you progress, where this knowledge is revealed to you. When you have your first experiences and they're spontaneous, or maybe you're trying to make them happen, but they happen, you'll often touch into what I call the mind of God. And you'll hear this from a lot of people who've had near-death experiences and also out-of-body experiences, that they will touch into the mind of God in the sense that all of a sudden they understand everything. All the mysteries of the universe are just clear to them at that moment. Now, when you return to the body, that clarity doesn't generally come with you, but you remember that you had it in that moment. And what happens over time as you're experiencing out-of-body travel is that you are receiving bits and parcels of that energetic truth that comes from the mind of God. And that is part of how our soul is then transformed, because whatever it is that we are holding on to that may or may not be true, but we believe it to be true, we can have the correction given to us through that infusion of the energetic truth, which is really, really important in terms of how we move forward. Even when you talk about the the world events that we've been looking at and that we've been talking about today, this is what is lacking right now, is that there is not this intrusive self-examination that needs to occur so that when people make decisions about the actions they will take, that they are truly trying to discern the will of God, not their own will, not someone else's delusion of what God's will is, but the energetic truth. And that is what you want to make your decisions on. And another great reason to pursue out-of-body experiences, because this is one of the means whereby that can come about.
Right. Okay. Just to touch upon the practical side of out-of-bodies a little bit.
Sure.
Robert Monroe was the well-known pioneer of out-of-body experiences in the very early 70s. He wrote the book Journeys Out of the Body, and I think he wrote a couple of others as well. How do you compare your out-of-body experiences along with his? Because he wrote of, it was a lot of it was his labeling of terms like locale 1, locale 2, i.e. locale 1 was the earth around him. Locale 2 might have been what people might today call the astral realm, and locale 3 was some other realm that he couldn't even place where it was, but it seemed to be sometimes an alternative type of earth. How do you compare with Robert Monroe's material?
Well, our material is very different, but I'd first like to just say, I read all of his books when I first started having the experiences. I am a huge fan of Robert Monroe. I highly respect his work. What he's done with the hemisync technologies is unprecedented, and what he's put into place with the Monroe Institute is absolutely fantastic. And I totally support that what he was doing was absolutely necessary in the evolution of out-of-body experiences, and it continues to be so now. The one thing that I would point out about Robert Monroe's experiences that I think is really important, that would it really affects the ability to travel into higher spheres. Robert Monroe got a little bit caught up in having what he would term astral sex. Now, that can happen, and in fact, it happens to most people who experience out-of-body experiences. I have a set of books that goes into this in quite a bit of detail. It's called the Mystical Captive Series, but it speaks about the barrier that has to be broken in order for the soul to go into the higher spheres, wherein higher knowledge and understanding then comes into these experiences. And many of my readers have communicated with me as they go through this, because the natural inclination of the human being is to go into the sexual centers. So it's absolutely a normal and required process in order to break through. But what will happen in the out-of-body state is that because it is such an ecstatic type of state, it will translate into their lower centers. And a lot of time they'll start having like an orgasm. And what has to happen is the soul has to move up and through that orgasm and beyond into the above, what is above that. Now, if the soul remains stuck in that sexual experience of the ecstatic vibration, it becomes very hard for it to go into the next levels. And so a lot of what my books do that is very different is that we try to move through all those stages and take it into, because what Robert Monroe was talking about was a lot to do with third and fourth realm and occasionally fifth realm type experiences. But when you're going into the books that I've written, we want to go to the multidimensional, which means there's an infinite number of higher spheres, there's an infinite number of lower spheres, and there's a whole lot more going on, and we want to break through that sexual barrier. A lot of people are uncomfortable talking about it It's funny because I get a lot of emails, and people really appreciate it that I brought it up in the Mystical Captive series, because people are uncomfortable talking about it. But it's when you understand it energetically, it makes perfect sense that the ecstatic energy would then translate into a lower chakra. But you eventually, as you continue traveling, as you break through this, those ecstatic experiences are going to be breaking into your heart centers, your third eye centers, and eventually through your crown chakra. So you're going to be moving that energy into these higher centers so that you can experience more and get into the realms of instruction as well, which is really pivotal. Robert Monroe's work is really, really important because he really opened the door to all of this. And a lot of people do start with reading his books and using his hemisync tapes. And different people have different outcomes with that.
What's the, has Robert Monroe kind of been contacted in the great beyond for kind of follow-ups or anything like that?
You know, that's an interesting question. I have not seen him in the out-of-body travel state. I've seen a lot of my other colleagues in the out-of-body travel state. For instance, George Ritchie, after he passed, he and I had done the Joan Rivers show together in the early 90s, and he came to me in the out-of-body state shortly after his death, probably about 8-10 years ago, not quite sure. And his purpose was to point out to me the hierarchy of the angels and the importance of the hierarchy of the angels. We don't realize, ironically, there's a book called the Urantia book, which I had quite a few out-of-body experiences about. The first section of that book explains the hierarchy of the angels in a way that no other book on earth does. We forget that we have angels that perform a myriad of functions. You know, they speak about things like thought adjusters, you know, angels who come in who are just trying to adjust our thoughts because we're getting off course. You know, so he had come to me for that.
A bit like the Adjustment Bureau, but more angelic.
Yeah. Yes, and you know, and I've seen a lot of my colleagues, but I've also seen a lot of saints throughout time. You know, I've had many experiences with Christ, with the Blessed Mother, with the Buddha. I had a beautiful experience where I was taken to see Krishna and Radha. I've seen Abdul Baha, who was the successor of Baha'u'llah in the Baha'i faith. And I've seen many of the saints and mystics and sages throughout time. And in fact, ironically, it was this one beautiful experience that I had. You know, the Out of Body Travel Foundation was founded in 2003. And I'd had a beautiful experience where all the prophets, saints, mystics, and sages, there were hundreds of them from throughout time, had gathered to for the purpose of giving me some instruction about what they wanted me to do. And the instruction was primarily they wanted everything to be available for free download. They and so I've always followed that for that reason. And ironically, it doesn't sound like such a big deal right now, but in 2003, it was a little more complicated because, you know, the big files were harder to upload and download. But, you know, I would receive guidance all along as to every step of the way as to what I was to do next. Even with the music and stuff, I was guided with that years before to, you know, get it all done and taken care of in very specific ways. And so, you know, I've had beautiful experiences with, you know, St. Padre Pio is one that I've seen quite a few times, and he's, it's always a huge honor when you get to see him. I've had experiences with St. Francis, St. Benedict, because a lot of what I was called in for was dealing with the spiritual warfare. So I had some with Saint Benedict because he was the founder of the Benedictine order, which is where the exorcisms and all that stuff comes from. Many, many different saints. I saw Teresa Newman, who was a stigmatist in Germany in the 1900s. And it's, last night I spent with an order in the heavens whose founder recently passed, and since she's passed, she's been coming to see me regularly. She's trying very hard to teach me, and sometimes I'm not that easy to teach, so she's been very patient. And, so there's so many things. I've seen Babaji. I painted Babaji because it was so cool when I saw him in the galactic heavens, just shooting by at the speed of light. I've gone to the temples of the masters in the galactic heavens as well.
I've got a bit of a curveball question for you, Marilynn.
No problem.
I mean, you've probably seen the films The Matrix, the Matrix trilogy, haven't you? I should imagine.
I actually haven't, so I apologize. But
you haven't? Oh my God! Okay, so that's going to be the first thing on your Netflix list is to download or have a look at the Matrix. But the curveball question is this: what would happen if, in reality, we're living in some kind of construct of programs running in a kind of holographic kind of way that each soul is kind of engrossed or ingrained into? And the people and the beings and the experiences that you're having, although may seem real, may possibly be a result of bumping into programs or running into kind of like almost not exactly hallucination, but what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of like a false representation of what's really going on. Do you ever kind of like ponder that could be the case, that you're actually running into kind of holographic programs as opposed to actual reality?
Actually, that's an interesting question. I do ponder it. I have pondered it many times over the years, but I don't believe that's what's happening in the sense that you just described it. But at the same time, I do feel that the quantum hologram theories are very much in accord with the nature of the universe and how it is constructed. The universe and how it is constructed is composed of realities upon realities upon realities that do interact, bump into each other, and have all these things. I was taught early on to engage in a very stringent discernment of the spirits, and if you want to learn that, I would go to the Mysteries of the Redemption, because you're going to see the whole process and how you do that. It's very important. But I would take it to, you will know it by its fruits.
I'll give a quick example of what I mean, and it's
okay.
And by the way, I don't necessarily. It could or it could not be a negative thing. It could be part of a control system, or it could be something to assist us. I don't know. But for instance, Jewish people may die and they might see Moses. Christian people may die and they might see Jesus. Buddhists may die and they might see Buddha. Muslims may die and they might see the Prophet Muhammad. So in other words, it's almost like, could it be that the universe is giving you what you expect to see in a kind of weird way?
Well, it's a great question, and I'll explain. No, in my case, I don't think so, but I totally understand why someone might think so. But the reason why I didn't start out as a Catholic, the irony was, I started out 30 some years ago, basically searching for the truth. One of the things I started with was, I wanted God to let me know what the truth was without whatever my preconceived ideas of him might be. One of the things that I think is hard for people, possibly, I don't know, some people it is, some people it's not, to accept, is that when you are in the mystical states, the only name that can help you when you are facing a spiritual battle is the name of Jesus Christ. And I wrote about this in my books. I said, one time I tried to call out for Edgar Casey. It just didn't work. But I did have this one really interesting battle where Jesus was there, but the Buddha was there fighting on my behalf, and so was the prophet Zarathustra. And Avalokiteshvara, which is a Buddhist, the Bodhisattva of compassion. She's kind of looked upon as the holy mother of Buddhism. So I did not start out as a Catholic. I started studying, ironically, I probably started mostly in the Buddhism. And I was very against the Catholic Church, I didn't even consider reading, even though I was being told to retrieve the ancient sacred texts. I was being told to do that. It didn't even occur to me to consider reading Catholic books. I studied every religion, every world religion, as well as every tradition, really went into the shamanistic stuff as well, wanted to understand the similarities and differences between those traditions as well. And then it was a fluke, 20 years into this search that I was like, well, gee, I studied everything else. I guess I should be open to looking at some of the Christian stuff. But what I found is that when you need help, you call for Christ. When you go to the higher realms, Christ is who he said he was. If you look at the actual annals of near-death experiences, the supposition that you made isn't actually correct. The reality is you can go to numerous sites on the web and you'll see hundreds of conversions of Muslims because they see Jesus Christ in a dream. You'll see that there are Buddhist monks who are seeing Jesus Christ in near-death experiences. It's hard for people to believe because they think you're just proposing or, a particular faith. And I don't do that because I love the Dalai Lama and I love Thich Nhat Hanh and I believe they are intended to be Buddhist, and I love Buddhism and I love Hinduism. I love all these religions, frankly. And I've studied them all. But the reality is that Christ is above. When you are in a room with the prophets, saints, mystics, and sages from all time throughout the ages and all faiths and stuff, Christ is the head of that royal family of God. They call themselves the royal family of God. And they all work together. So this is not just the prophets, this is the saints of each of these traditions. So like Milarepa would be working with Mother Teresa, you know what I mean? See, these are they're all working together. Rumi works with all of them. So does, Imam Ghazali, all of our deceased saints, ascetics, mystics, and sages, which there are hundreds of those, continue to work for the betterment of human existence. So I don't say it coming from a dogmatic perspective. I say it coming from pure experience that it's just the case. If you go to the city of New Jerusalem, Christ is the one who reigns over it. It's a beautiful place. Golden Streets, the Palace of Ancient Knowledge, which is the library. This is one thing, too, that I think people might be interested in. In the city of the New Jerusalem, golden streets, pearls, gemstones everywhere, diamond buildings. It's so beautiful. The Palace of Ancient Knowledge is a 6th-floor library that houses all the ancient sacred texts, the scrolls, everything that's ever been written from every faith and tradition, and it houses all of it there. It is so amazing. But you know what I think people would be surprised to hear is that there are ancient sacred galactic texts too. So the extraterrestrial races also have their own ancient sacred texts. And this is something that we
if
have.
You think about it, I don't see why not,
Exactly. And they're there too.
In fact, I'd be more surprised if they didn't.
Exactly.
I bet there's quite a few library books out at the minute.
Yeah. So, I think the universe is much vaster than most people believe. The quantum hologram theory is something that I feel is very closely associated with how spiritual existence works in terms of the universal spheres. It absolutely is very similar to this.
And I wonder if spiritual beings hop between dimensions. Like, could Jesus well be hopping between Earth and other planets all over the universe?
Yeah.
He's called something else on another planet or something.
So this is it.
Yeah. When I was taken to heaven, the galactic heavens, years ago, and since then many times, and one of the most astonishing finds that I had going there, if you go through this star tunnel to get there, and it's another dimensional existence of the universe where the heavenly realms exist. There aren't just human beings there. There's beings from other planets and other worlds, and it's so normal there that you don't even think about it until you return and you're like, wait a minute, there were aliens in heaven. And you're like, wow, that's pretty interesting, that's cool, but we forget we are a microcosm of what all existence is. We're just a small part, but the part that we play here is so much more important than we realize, because so many of us are wasting time. We have a limited amount of time here for a reason. There's something that we are to achieve while we're here. And, if you're not Christian, you don't need to freak out, because I'm telling you that Jesus Christ is the head of the royal family of God. Because people are called to different paths of religious discovery or spiritual discovery for varying reasons. And I wrote about this in the Mysteries of the Redemption. Every religion has different qualities that it offers to his soul. This is where you can also get into reincarnation, but we can save that for another conversation. It's all in the books, so if you want to read them, you can do that too. And, that's at outofbodytravel.org for anybody who wants to explore that further. But we have the capacity and we have the need to fulfill the function of our existence here. And we don't want to keep wasting time. It's very common on this planet for people to waste a lot of time. And that creates a cycle of circular reincarnations that isn't very pleasant. And so there is a way to make a simple decision that you're going to turn yourself towards a higher thrust. You're going to be willing to receive, what you're going to find in the mystical realms is that Jesus Christ is the head of all of it. That doesn't in any way reduce the importance of the other prophets. What was shown to me was that Christ is different because his station is different. A prophet is one station, a Messiah is another, and the Messiah position is a higher station. Simply, it doesn't in any way minimize the importance of the other prophets. It doesn't minimize the saints, mystics, and sages and ascetics, because they all hold keys. In my experiences, I have seen over and over again the ancient sacred texts were placed like a stairway from earth to heaven, because these are the last words of souls that actually transcend this sphere right before they leave. And you follow that staircase of ancient sacred texts, it's going to lead you to heaven. Every one of those ancient sacred texts has a separate key. You put all those keys together, you're creating an understanding of who God is, who our universe is, ironically bringing in this idea of the matrix, which ironically is very related as well to remote viewing, but also the quantum hologram. When you get into like the traveling into the transcendental spheres, this is where you really see where the hologram theory really plays out. You see the different blocks of hologrammatic manifestation through the universe. You're not going to see that immediately, but it is out there. Existence is so much vaster than any of us really understand.
Oh my God, it is a complete and utter universal minefield. I think we're going to have to leave it there now, Marilynn, because we are winding up the end of the program now.
Fascinating stuff there.
Yeah, I mean, there was questions I was going to ask, but obviously we've run out of time, so I'd have to ask you for another occasion if that's possible.
Sure.
And I'm sure if there's listeners that want to ask questions to you, they can do so. How can they ask you questions if they want to get in touch?
Oh, you can. My email address is at the top of my website, outofbodytravel.org. My email address is Marilynn Hughes at outofbodytravel.org. You can download all of our books on the Out of Body Books page on the site. We also offer a course of study that is also free. You can go there and take that course of study and start this process right away. And a lot of people who are taking it are saying it's life-changing for them.
Wow, that's great. Well, thank you very, very much indeed from Andy and myself and everybody at the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And we are the Paranormal Peep Show. So that's Marilynn who's taking part with us this evening. And she represents the outofbodytravel.org website. So go there for further information on the work of the paranormal and the out-of-body experiences. So thank you once again, Marilynn, for taking part with us this evening.
Yeah,
thank you for having me. It was really fun. Thank you so much.
All right, and we'll see you again on the Paranormal Peep Show. Good night, all.
See you later, everyone.